the night of 22 March 1943. A canvas tent outside the Tunisian village of Memdanain. Rain hammering the roof so hard that the wireless operator has to shout to be heard. Inside, hurricane lamps swing against the canvas. Mud is tracked across the duckboards, and in the center of it all stands a 12-foot sand table, colored sand, plaster ridges, tiny carved wooden blocks for divisions and corps, and a small, sharp-faced general staring down at it, like a man staring at his own grave. The flap of the tent throws open. A young Royal Artillery captain steps in, soaked, his cap dripping. He removes it. He waits to be acknowledged. "Well?" the general says. He does not look up. "Sir." The casualty figures from Wadi Zigzao. Numbers, Captain. 600, sir, and rising. There is a long silence. Outside the rain. "Thank you, Captain. That will be all." The captain salutes and steps back into the storm. And Bernard Law Montgomery, the most rigid commander in the British Army, the man who never improvised, the architect of Alamein, places both hands on the edge of the sand table and bows his head. In the next 8 hours, he will do something he almost never does. He will tear up his master plan and reverse it overnight. And the trick that makes him do it will not be a secret weapon. It will not be a cipher break. It will not be a spy. It will be a table full of sand. If you love the moments where one decision changes the entire war, hit that subscribe button and join the WWII elite community. Drop a comment below, tell us what story is fascinating you today. Because tonight, we're telling you one of the most undertold reversals of the entire Second World War. Let us go back 2 weeks earlier. It is early March 1943. The Axis Empire in Africa is dying. From the sands of El Alamein, 1,800 miles behind him, Montgomery has chased the Afrika Korps across Egypt, Libya, and into Tunisia. Tobruk is gone. Tripoli is gone. Benghazi is gone. The desert war that began in 1940 is now in its final act. And Erwin Rommel, the desert fox, the ghost of the dunes, is gone too. On the 9th of March, sick and exhausted, Rommel boards a Junkers transport and flies to Germany. He will never return to Africa. His parting assessment of the Mareth Line, scribbled in the margin of a staff document, is brutal in its honesty. "This line cannot hold without depth. We have no depth." Command passes to General Oberst Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, sitting in Tunis. Direct command of the Mareth defenses passes to a man Rommel both respected and pitied, General Giovanni Messe, an Italian regular of the old school. Cultured. Quiet. Privately contemptuous of what he calls in his diary Berlin's fairy tales. In his command post one evening that week, Messe receives a young staff officer who has just returned from inspecting the Wadi defenses. "How is morale?" Messe asks. "The Germans are silent, sir. The Italians are tired." "And the line itself?" The young officer hesitates. "Sir, with respect, the line is a farde. The Wadi is deep. The pillboxes are old. But there is nothing behind us." Messe nods, slowly. He turns to the map on the wall. "Then we shall make the Fard look like a fortress, and we shall pray the British believe it." Across the lines, Bernard Montgomery believes it completely. The Mareth Line is no joke. Built by French colonial engineers in the 1930s, originally aimed at Italian Libya, it is a 35-kilometer belt of concrete pillboxes, wire, and minefields anchored on the Mediterranean and running inland into the Matmata Hills. Its centerpiece is a moat with claws, Wadi Zigzao, 70 meters wide, 4 meters deep. A floor of soft red clay that turns to glue in the rain. Montgomery looks at this line and sees Alamein. And for Bernard Montgomery, in March 1943, Alamein is the answer to every question. 300 guns. A creeping barrage. Set-piece infantry assault. Build a bridgehead. Pour the armor through. Win. He summons Lieutenant General Sir Oliver Leese, the loud, bluff cavalry officer commanding X Corps, and gives him the frontal mission. Oliver. The 50th will lead. Across the Wadi. Behind the barrage. Bridgehead by dawn. Tanks across by noon. Are you clear? Perfectly clear, sir. Then make it so. Leese salutes and leaves. He walks back to his own headquarters in the rain. climbs into his command caravan, sits down, and writes in a private letter that night a sentence that would haunt him for 30 years. I felt I was being asked to fight Pashan Dalil in the desert. Montgomery believes brute force will win again. He is wrong. And the man who will prove him wrong is not a German. He is a New Zealander. To understand what is about to happen, you must understand Bernard Freyberg. 6 feet tall. Deep-chested. A massive, slow-moving man who limps from old wounds taken at Gallipoli and on the Somme. He has been wounded so many times that Churchill once asked to see his scars and counted 27. The Prime Minister called him the salamander, the creature said to live unharmed in fire. Freyberg commands the New Zealand Corps, and Freyberg has a reputation in the British Army that even Montgomery respects. He does not lie. Not to his men. Not to his generals. Not to himself. For 3 weeks before Pugilist, Freyberg has been quietly working a back door. It begins with a young lieutenant of the long-range desert group named Tinker. In late January, Tinker's patrol, a handful of jeeps, a few signalers, a doctor, drives 240 miles into open desert south and west of the Matmata Hills. They are looking for a route, a way around. Where there should be impassable terrain, they find a corridor, rough, dusty, scattered with goat tracks, but passable. They follow it north until they reach the Tebaga Gap, a 5-kilometer slot between the Matmata Hills and the Jebel Tebaga Massif, 60 kilometers west of the main Mareth positions. It is, in effect, a back door to the entire Mareth Line. And it is held thinly. Tinker's report goes straight to Freyberg. Freyberg goes straight to Montgomery. Bernard, Freyberg says, he is one of the few men who calls Montgomery by his first name. There is a route, the Plum Route. We can put a corps around the line. The whole line. Montgomery studies the map, he listens. And then he decides, as he so often does, to compromise. Very well, Bernard. You will mount your hook. But it will be the secondary effort. The main blow will be at the Wadi. Freyberg looks at him for a long moment. He does not argue. He simply says, "Understood, sir." But on the way out, walking back to his own jeep, his second-in-command, Brigadier Kippenberger, falls into step beside him. "Sir." "Did he agree?" "He agreed to the hook," Freyberg says quietly. He did not say how big it had to be. And from that moment, the New Zealand engineers begin widening goat tracks, building dumps, surveying water. Quietly, methodically, without orders, Freyberg is building a railway for a Plan B that does not yet officially exist. When Pugilist fails, and Freyberg already half believes it will, Montgomery will only have to board the train. Freyberg has built a back door to the entire Mareth Line. The problem is, his commander still wants to break down the front. The rain begins on the night of the 20th of March. At 22:30 hours, 300 guns of Sex Corps open fire on the Mareth defences. The horizon over Wadi Zigzag turns orange. Men of the 50th Northumbrian Division, Jordays, Tynesiders, miners and shipyard riveters in uniform, climb out of their start line and walk forward into the noise. Behind them, the rain falls harder. The lead company of 151 Brigade reaches the lip of the Wadi. They look down. 40 feet below, the Wadi floor is already churning into mud. They go down anyway. They cross. They fight up the far side. By dawn, a small bridgehead exists. And then the rain wins the battle. The fascines, bundles of wood meant to fill the Wadi for tanks, sink in the mud. The bulldozers bog. Valentine tanks, sent across to support the infantry, slither sideways in the clay. By midday on the 21st, fewer than 30 British tanks have made it to the far bank. The anti-tank guns are stuck on the home side. Then the Germans counterattack. The 15th Panzer Division, what is left of it, comes down the road in driving rain. Panzer IVs at the front, half tracks behind. The British infantry has rifles, Bren guns. A handful of 6-pounders dragged across by hand. They fight. They die. The bridgehead does not collapse all at once. It bleeds. A 50th Division sergeant, interviewed in old age for an oral history project, would say it best. "It wasn't the Germans that did for us, son. The mud took the tanks before the Germans did. We were fighting two enemies. One had panzers. The other had rain. By 1500 hours on the 22nd of March, Oliver Leese knows the frontal attack is finished. He sends a signal to 8th Army Tactical HQ. Bridgehead untenable, without massive reinforcement. Request urgent decision. The signal lands on Montgomery's table at 15:30. At 15:45, almost simultaneously, a second signal arrives. From the desert. From Freyberg. Tebaga route open. Suggest reinforcement at strength. Montgomery reads both signals. He puts them down. He stands. He walks to the door of the operations tent and looks out at the rain. For the next 90 minutes, by every account, he says almost nothing. His aides describe him pacing, drinking tea, refusing food. He is a man who never smokes, and yet one staff officer remembered him absent-mindedly picking up a cigarette from the operations table, holding it, and putting it down again. That is how unsettled he is. Because what these two signals mean, taken together, is that everything he has planned for 2 months is wrong. By midnight on the 22nd of March 1943, Bernard Montgomery, the man who never improvises, is standing over a sand table about to throw away his own plan. The tent at Memoirs is small, hurricane lamps, a wireless humming in the corner, maps pinned to canvas walls, and the table. The sand table itself is a thing of craftsmanship, 12 feet by 8, a relief of southern Tunisia in colored sand and plaster, built over 3 weeks by a Royal Engineers section. Mountains in grey plaster. The Mediterranean in blue chalk dust, rivers in black thread, and on its surface, small carved wooden blocks, each one a unit, each one a possibility. At 2300 hours, a jeep splashes up to the tent. Out of it climbs a tall, cheerful, mud-spattered figure with the bearing of a born actor, and the smile of a man who has never doubted himself in his life. Lieutenant General Sir Brian Horrocks, commander of X Corps, the man Montgomery jokingly called his thruster, the one general in 8th Army who could be trusted to charge. He ducks into the tent. He removes his cap. He sees Montgomery's face. Bad? Horrocks asks. Bad, Montgomery says. Horrocks walks to the table. He looks down at the carved blocks, the divisions, the corps, the brigades arranged in his commander's master plan. He looks at the wadi. He looks at the wreckage represented in the small red markers around it. He looks at the empty desert flank. Sir, he says quietly, we are losing a division at Wadi Zigzag for nothing. I am aware, Brian. Then we must move. Tonight. Montgomery does not answer. Horrocks reaches across the table. He picks up the carved wooden block representing 1st Armored Division, Briggs's command, 200 Shermans, the killing weight of X-Corps. He holds it for a moment between thumb and forefinger, and he places it on the western flank. On the plum route. There is silence. Bernard, Horrocks says, quieter now, almost gentle. We will lose another division at Zigzag for nothing. Use the back door. Send everything. Montgomery stares at the block, then at the wadi, then at the western flank. For an hour he asks questions. Water along the route? Sufficient. Freyberg has dumps. Air cover? Broadhurst can give it. Fuel? Briggs has reach. Time? 3 days to assembly. 1 night for the assault. And if Messi sees us coming? Sir, he isn't looking. The dust storms are covering us. The DAF is screening us. He believes we are still committed at the wadi. Montgomery nods. Very slowly. He picks up another block. The headquarters of X-Corp itself. He holds it for a long moment, the way a man holds a stone he is about to throw across a river he can never cross again. And he places it too on the western flank. He turns to Horrocks. Gentlemen, he says. Though only Horrocks is in the tent, the front door is shut. We will go in by the side. The decision has taken 8 hours and 1 piece of carved wood. Now Montgomery has to move 27,000 men, 200 tanks, an entire corps headquarters, and most of his armored punch 240 miles across the desert without anyone, including the Germans, knowing. At dawn on the 23rd of March 1943, a signal goes from 8th Army to 18th Army Group, Tunis. I have decided to swing my whole weight to my left hook. Harold Alexander reads it at breakfast. He puts the paper down. He smiles, very faintly. Well, he says to his chief of staff. Bernard has changed his mind. There's a first time for everything. Now picture the desert. 27,000 men. The New Zealand Corps already at the Tebaga approach. Dug in, waiting. Behind them, on the move, the entire reinforced X-Corps, 1st Armoured Division, 8th Armoured Brigade, the King's Dragoon Guards in armoured cars, fuel trucks by the hundred, water bowsers, ambulances, signal sections, engineers, even bakery sections towed in trailers. All of it grinding north and west through Wilder's Gap and along the Plum Route. Wireless silence. Total. Not one transmission. Hand signals and dispatch riders only. For Brian Horrocks, on the move with his column, this is the most nerve-wracking 3 days of his career. He would later write in his memoirs of the constant fear that one drunk corporal, one careless sergeant, one confused signaller would key a microphone and give the whole plan away to German signals intelligence in a single sentence. It does not happen. But it almost does. At 0200 hours on the 25th of March, a Sherman squadron of the Staffordshire Yeomanry, one of the units of 8th Armoured Brigade, takes a wrong turn at a fork in a wadi. Their commander, a young major, realizes within 20 minutes that his squadron is heading northwest when it should be heading north. He has 15 tanks behind him. Headlights are forbidden. He stops his column. He climbs out of his turret. He stands on the engine deck of his Sherman in the freezing desert night, looks up at the stars, and finds Polaris. About turn, he says to his lead driver, "We follow the star." For 2 hours that squadron navigates by celestial bearing alone. In moonlight, through wadis they cannot see properly. At 0500 hours they rejoin the main column. Not one tank lost. Not one wireless transmission made. That major's report would later be filed in the war diary of the 8th Armoured Brigade with a single, dry sentence. Squadron took a wrong route. Squadron rejoined. But here is what nobody noticed at the time. Inside the Mareth Line, on the 24th of March, an 8th Army intelligence officer is going through captured Axis paperwork from a forward command post overrun the previous night. Most of it is rubbish, ration returns, boot inventories. Then he opens a buff folder. Inside is a strategic appreciation written in February. The signature at the bottom is Rommel's. In the margin, in pencil, in the Field-Marshal's own handwriting, are 7 words. This line cannot hold without depth. We have no depth. The intelligence officer reads it twice. Then he runs. The note is on Montgomery's desk by the evening of the 24th. The decision has already been made. The march is already happening. But the dead man's pencil, Rommel's last verdict on his own line, written 6 weeks earlier, confirms, in writing, what Montgomery decided over a sand table in the rain. It is the kind of moment that makes historians shiver. Across the lines, the Axis High Command has no idea any of this is happening. In Tunis, on the 24th of March, von Arnim signals Berlin. The British attack at Mareth is contained. Enemy losses heavy. No threat to depth. He is wrong. By 240 miles. In Messi's command post, the picture is slightly clearer but no less wrong. Air reconnaissance has been failing for 48 hours. Dust storms in the south, swarms of Desert Air Force Spitfires above. One reconnaissance Junkers does report movement of vehicles in the Wilder Gap area. The report is filed. It is not believed. The senior staff officer who reads it writes a single word in the margin. In German. Unmöglich. Impossible. In the Tebaga Gap itself, General Lieutenant Kurt von Liebenstein's 164th Light Africa Division is digging in. So are elements of the Italian Pistoia Division. Together they have, by the best modern reconstruction, fewer than 15,000 men, perhaps 30 tanks, and Italian units with as few as 6 anti-tank guns covering the entire western flank. It is a paper line. It is meant to be a paper line. Nobody in Tunis or Berlin believes the British will come through there in strength. And meanwhile, behind the British lines, another argument is happening. One nobody outside the Desert Air Force ever forgets. Air Vice Marshal Sir Harry Broadhurst, commanding the Desert Air Force, has been briefed on the new plan. He listens. He asks 2 questions. And then, he proposes something that violates standing RAF doctrine. I want to put my fighter bombers in low, he says. Below 500 feet. Every 15 minutes. For 2.5 hours. His superior, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Conyngham, Mary Conyngham, a New Zealander himself, is uneasy. Harry. The flak ceiling at Tebaga is 40 feet to 1,000. You will lose squadrons. I will lose pilots, Mary. But I will break that line. It violates doctrine. Doctrine has not won this war yet. There is a pause. Conyngham looks at him. All right, Harry. Your responsibility. Broadhurst nods. He returns to his squadrons. He gathers his Kitty Hawk and Hurricane pilots and gives them an order that told decades later his airmen could still recite from memory. You will fly low. You will fly often. Anyone above 500 feet is wasting petrol. On the night of the 25th, an entire British corps is driving by moonlight through a desert where the Germans believe nothing exists, and in 36 hours, the sky over Tebaga is about to be torn apart by a plan no air commander has ever tried. The morning of the 26th of March 1943 dawns clear, cold, bright, no dust, perfect flying weather. By 1500 hours, Freyberg's New Zealanders are on their start lines at the southern lip of the Tebaga Gap. The 8th Armoured Brigade is behind them. 1st Armoured Division is positioned to exploit. 27,000 men, 300 tanks, 400 guns, all of it crammed into a 5-kilometer slot of desert that the Axis High Command does not believe is being threatened. At 15:30, Freyberg climbs to a forward observation post on a ridge overlooking the gap. He has done this every day for a week, often within range of Italian artillery. He raises his binoculars. Behind him, his signaller listens for the code word. At 1600 hours sharp, the code word comes. The sky breaks open. Broadhurst's Kitty Hawks come in first. Low, so low that pilots later swore in their squadron diaries that they were flying below the lip of the gap, looking up at Italian gunners on the ridges. Cannon fire rakes the trenches. Hurricanes follow with their 40mm tank guns, pounding pillboxes. Spitfires above as top cover. Every 15 minutes, a fresh wave. And another. And another. Behind the rolling air blitz, the New Zealand infantry rises. The 8th Armoured Brigade rolls forward beside them. Behind them, the sun is setting in the west, directly behind the British, blinding the Italian and German defenders who have to look into it. The Italians break first. Then, 164th Light. By 1830 the line is cracking. By 2030 it is broken in 2 places. Now comes the part Bernard Montgomery has bet his career on. A night armoured advance. Through a hostile gap. In moonlight. By an entire division. It has almost never been done in the war. Tanks are blind at night. Crews exhaust themselves. Navigation collapses. Friendly fire kills as many as the enemy does. Every staff college in Europe in 1943 says, do not do this. And at 2200 hours on the 26th of March, by the light of a brilliant rising moon, Major General Raymond Briggs's 1st Armoured Division begins its advance through the breach. By 0200 hours on the 27th, the lead Sherman squadrons are 15 miles deep. By 0400, 25. By dawn. By the cold pale dawn of the 27th of March 1943, the lead Shermans of 1st Armoured Division are at El Hamma, which sits squarely on the only escape road of Messi's entire 1st Italian Army. In his command post that morning, Giovanni Messi, the cultured Italian general who had told his staff to make the line look like a fortress, receives the report. He listens in silence. He asks for it to be repeated. He looks at the map. He sees, written in pencil arrows by his own staff officers, a British armoured division behind his entire line. He turns to his chief of staff. They have come where no road exists, he says, and these words are recorded in his diary that night. We are undone. Within 2 hours Messi issues the only order left to him. Abandon Mareth. Withdraw northward. Save what can be saved. The 90th Light Division and Liebenstein's 164th Light begin their retreat, fighting all the way, leaving rear guards in every wadi, but retreating nonetheless. Behind them they leave 70 tanks, hundreds of guns, and 7,000 men who will never make the column. On the 28th of March 1943, men of the 50th Northumbrian Division, the same men who had bled in the mud of Wadi Zigzao 6 nights earlier, walk forward into the Mareth defences. They expect another battle. They find empty pillboxes, empty trenches, a wadi half flooded with rainwater. The German soldier dropped his Mauser in the mud. The Italian gunner left his shells stacked in their crates. The line that had killed 600 men of the 50th Division was empty. A young captain of the Durham Light Infantry, walking through the abandoned positions, picked up an Italian helmet from a trench and turned it over in his hands. He would write home that night in a letter that ended up, decades later, in the Imperial War Museum. They were here yesterday. Today they are gone. We did not break the line, Mother. We walked around it. Back at 8th Army HQ, Brian Horrocks would later set down, in the calmest sentence in his memoirs, what had really happened that week. It was the only time I ever saw Monty visibly change a master plan in 24 hours. The full meaning of those 8 hours in a tent at Emdenin, with rain on the canvas, hurricane lamps swinging, a sand table, and a single carved wooden block, is this. A campaign was redirected. A corps-level plan was reversed. The southern door of Tunisia was kicked open. And the destruction of Heeresgruppe Afrika was set up 6 weeks ahead of schedule. What followed reads like a list of consequences from a dam breaking. On the 6th of April 1943, 8th Army smashed the next defensive line at Wadi Akarit. On the 7th of May, Tunis and Bizerte fell. On the 13th of May, 250,000 Axis soldiers, one of the largest surrenders of the entire Second World War, laid down their arms in the Cape Bon Peninsula. The Germans had a word for it. Tunisgrad. Their second Stalingrad. Their second lost army in 6 months. 2 months after that, on the 10th of July, Allied forces invaded Sicily, directly from Tunisian airfields and Tunisian ports. The road to Italy. The road, in a sense, to Rome and Berlin. Every step of it traced back, in the ledger of cause and effect, to a sand table in a rainy tent. Of the men in that tent, and of the men who fought the battle they planned, history kept its various ledgers. Bernard Montgomery would go on to command 21st Army Group through Normandy and across Germany. He would become a Field-Marshal, a Viscount, a national figure. But his biographers all noticed something strange about the man in the years after Mareth. He never again improvised a plan. In 24 hours, he never again moved a corps overnight on the strength of a junior commander's signal. After Mareth, he became famous, even infamous, for rigidity. The flexible Montgomery, the man who tore up his own master plan because his New Zealander told him the back door was open, appeared once, and was never seen again. Brian Horrocks was wounded by a bomb splinter at Bizerte 2 months later, on the 7th of June 1943, and very nearly died. He came back. He commanded XX Corps at Arnhem. He commanded XX Corps in the Rhineland. He became one of the most beloved generals in the British Army, a man who after the war would tell his staff, with that easy smile of his, that the bravest decision he ever saw a commander make was made in a tent full of rain, by a man who never wanted to make it. Bernard Freyberg led the New Zealand division through the rest of Italy, through Cassino, through the Senio. He survived. Despite the salamander myth being tested again and again, he became Governor-General of his own country, New Zealand, and held the post for 6 years. He died in 1963, aged 74, with 27 scars on his body and the affection of 3 armies. Harry Broadhurst's rolling blitz technique, the doctrine-breaking, low-level, every 15 minutes air assault he had taken personal responsibility for, became the template. It was used over the Normandy beaches in June 1944. It was used in the Falaise Pocket. It was used in the Ardennes. The cab rank close air support of 1944 and 1945 was born in a 5-kilometer gap in southern Tunisia on a clear afternoon in March 1943. Giovanni Messe surrendered with the Axis forces in Tunisia on the 13th of May 1943 and was promoted to Marshal of Italy by Mussolini while in British captivity, one of the strangest promotions of the entire war. After Italy's surrender, he served the post-war Italian state. Hans-Jürgen von Arnim spent the rest of the war as a prisoner in Britain, treated by all accounts with quiet courtesy. And the Tebaga maneuver itself, the night march, the rolling air blitz, the night armored exploitation became, very quickly, a textbook study. At Kimberley, at Fort Leavenworth, at the Soviet General Staff Academy, it was, by general agreement, the first time in the entire Second World War that air power, armor, and night maneuver were used as a single integrated weapon at core scale. Everything about modern combined arms warfare, everything that 1944 and 1945 took for granted, had its first proper rehearsal in that gap. But here, at the end, is the smallest piece of this story. And, perhaps, the largest. In the years after the war, a former staff officer of 8th Army wrote a letter to a friend describing the night of the 22nd of March 1943. He described the rain, the hurricane lamps, the sand table. He described Montgomery picking up the carved wooden block of 1st Armored Division and moving it across the sand. And then, he described what happened to that block. When the operations tent was struck a few weeks later, that block, small, hand-carved, the size of a man's thumb, was missing. Brian Horrocks had pocketed it. He kept it. He kept it for the rest of his life. After his death, his family found it, still wrapped in tissue paper, in a small box at the back of a desk drawer. In a letter to his friend years later, Horrocks wrote a single sentence about it, a small carved piece of wood, he wrote, that decided the fate of an army. The Mareth Line, in all its concrete and wire, in all its rivers and ridges, was never beaten by firepower. It was beaten by flexibility, by the willingness of one rigid man, on one rainy night, to listen to a New Zealander, to look at a sand table, and to admit, for once in his career, that the front door was shut and the side door was open. That, in the end, is the lesson of Mareth. Not that armies win battles, but that sometimes a single decision in a single tent, taken in a single hour by a single mind willing to change itself, decides the lives of tens of thousands and the shape of years. 600 men of the 50th Division paid the price of the wrong plan. 27,000 more carried out the right one. And somewhere in a desk drawer in England, for 30 years, sat a piece of carved wood, the size of a thumb, that had moved across a table of sand on the night of the 22nd of March 1943, and broken the strongest defensive line in North Africa. That's another untold chapter of history. If this moved you, hit like, subscribe to WWII Decoded, and share with a fellow history lover. Comment below, what should we cover next?